Hey everyone, and once again welcome back to the next devlog of my current game dev project, a third-person shooter where you command a squad of highly specialized soldiers through a horrific mission. First, I'd like to thank all of you for the feedback regarding my first demo. Thanks to you, I could already fix some bugs and also take notes about design features and other ideas for later days to come. There will be more demos in the future once the increments have been big enough. A big portion of my recent time went into further improving the player controller. One thing that bugged me a bit is the slow movement of the player when normally walking, so I completely overhauled the standard walk of the player, which is now more of a jogging locomotion. It's still not sprinting, but also not walking, much better. I also bought a new asset which lets you procedurally add some weight and jiggle to any kind of game object called Bone Stimulator. And let me tell you, this brings the whole feel of the character controller to another level. I added set Stimulator to the spine of the character and, what can I say, look for yourself. It really feels like the player is made out of flesh by now, and I also added this Stimulator to the backpack and back pouch to give them a bit of a wobble. Okay, the next thing I made huge increments with are the AI teammates, but let me tell you, getting AI working and believable is one hell of a task. By now, I did solve a couple of problems in game development, but creating AI that should look and behave smart is one of the biggest problems I had to tackle so far. The teammates are currently capable of two tasks, either following the player or holding a certain position which the player has assigned. They aggro on any enemies in their proximity by default and prioritize the enemy which is closest to them. They also try to keep a distance to an enemy if one gets too close, also known as kiting. Last but not least, they prevent friendly fire by just shooting if they have a clear line of sight to their enemy. Technically, the whole thing is powered by a behavior tree which describes the logical flow of scripts. There is a very nice asset to use here which helps with creating these behavior trees visually, called Behaviour Designer. This behavior tree goes hand in hand with a single script which also contains a lot of logic for the AI. By default, an AI teammate is always seeking its current follow target. This follow target can be dynamically set via script and in my case is either the player's transform or a fixed position in the world space, which represents a position that needs to be defended or held. There is a certain area around the follow target which is used to determine destinations of a teammate. When the teammates follow the player, I make sure they always seek a point behind the player so they don't get in the way. I am using the A-Star Pathfinding Project as my main pathfinding asset, since I'm not convinced of Unity's pathfinding solution. This asset allows me to create random paths very easily and also comes with a very easy to add collision avoidance. To make the teammates sense enemies, I cast via sphere overlap for nearby enemies in a fixed time step and always save the result to a list. If the list has at least one entry, the teammate then moves into an aiming stance and once entered starts to shoot at the enemy. I made sure to use inheritance in this case, so the teammate is always scanning for the base class enemy and will always use the logic of that base class. This means that every specific enemy I implement later on derives from that base class, so I don't have to differentiate for every enemy type that will be added later on in the code. As for the visuals, I mostly recycle the player controller's approach. There is a basic locomotion blend tree for walking. I then blend in the gun over this animation using inverse kinematics and apply additional bone rotations in late update. Last but not least, I also added the earlier mentioned bone stimulator to give some extra jiggle to the teammates, paired with correct IK foot placement. You can find out more about the whole procedural stuff in my second devlog. Some smaller updates I'd like to mention are the new UI elements giving information about your AI teammates. They are pretty basic for now, but based on decisions I will make later on, there might be some more information to show. Also, I improved the flashlight's feel by adding springs to the flashlight's X and Y movement, which gives it a very organic feel now. You can learn more about springs also in my second devlog. Next, I'd like to finally talk a bit about the universe my game plays in and the story of the game in general. As in many universes, there's always an antagonist. In my case, it's an organization called Kronos Research, which is the world's leading tech and research company. And as always, Kronos is involved in some shady businesses and also does a lot of testing and researching on dangerous and illegal stuff behind closed doors. One day, they find out about a big meteor hundreds of meters beneath the surface in a very isolated forest in the middle of nowhere. They soon realize that this meteor has some kind of extraterrestrial biomass trapped inside it, and decide to build a laboratory on top of the meteor to directly examine the finding at the crash site. Once they finished building the lab, they filled up the facility with staff and started to begin extracting samples, performing tests, etc. One employee of Kronos already realizes after a couple of experiments that the organism frozen inside the meteor is a threat to humanity, and leaks crucial information to an old friend of his who works for the government. This friend uses the information given by the leaker to mobilize a special squad of genetically engineered operators. This squad is used to perform the most important, most morally questionable, and most dangerous missions there are. They are pretty much ghosts, and their existence isn't documented anywhere, whereas their success rate is at 100%. So, this team is deployed to the crash site of the meteor to investigate the laboratory and possibly take actions to prevent things from getting problematic. But with Kronos being the world's leader in tech, they make sure to secure the whole forest against any unwanted air traffic, which leads to Kronos shooting down the air convoy of the squad. Due to their superhuman characteristics, all 4 members of the team survive and now have to make their way to the laboratory to unfold the true nature of the alien threat. What was inside the meteor exactly? A strange form of extraterrestrial mold which replicates by taking over other organisms. Its most unique property are spikes which grow out of the host's body and then act like a weapon, giving it the name Spike Mold. And, you guessed it, once the team arrives at the Kronos laboratory, shit has already hit the fan, meaning the mold took over the facility. The squad's main objective will be the cover-up of any evidence of the incident, the termination of any infested life forms, and the destruction of the meteor. With the current trend of generating images using AI through text prompts, I tried to use this technology to my advantage and created some conceptual images in different styles using Midjourney. And I gotta say, Midjourney is able to create some top tier images which help me to further immerse myself into the universe I want to create. It's always better to have a reference image of how things could or should look like when creating them in a 3D environment, and they also greatly convey the tone of the atmosphere. I generated some images showing the forest area with the entrance of the laboratory at the beginning of the game. Also, I tried to visualize the earlier mentioned spike mold, including the different infestation states on its hosts. And yes, stating the obvious, my game will have a more simple, low poly look, but it still helps if I have a conceptual design for something, even if it doesn't match the art style. I didn't hesitate to try to draw some concept art myself, but as you can tell, I'm not a big of an illustrator. I'll happily hand that job over to Midjourney. Alright, with the beginning of the game set, I've started to work on the Greybox for the Prologue level. The plan is to introduce the player to all mechanics and give him a safe space to get used to the game before action starts in the laboratory later on. He will step through the forest, but will hit a ghostly outpost early on. Also, some security drones will appear, which will act as the first enemies. The player will then advance deeper into the woods to perform some kind of task to repower the entrance of the laboratory, where the prologue ends. I imagine the entrance of the bunker like a big castle with a lot of security fortifications inside, and a big elevator to the lab, which also acts as the only entrance. With the story and lore getting more and more specific, and the game's main mechanics coming together slowly but steadily, I finally have a name for my game. My goal is to create a Steam page by the end of 2022, with at least a couple of honest, high-quality screenshots. A trailer will most likely follow later, paired with a free demo on Steam. I plan to use the whole prologue of the game as the demo, which also acts as a vertical slice, so everyone can get a good feel of how the game plays out. Make sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoyed watching. You can also take a look at my socials and hit the bell to stay updated about this project. As always, have a nice day and please don't spill your beer.